Hello, thank you very much for inviting us. We also thank you for all the organizers, all the participants, and to Yuri Palmin who introduced us. And our lecture is called Kosmos Chaos. And basically, we wanted to start with the name of our office, Kosmos, and we wanted to make a note that we don't want to directly, the meaning of the word is not has a connection with astronauts or with outer space. We more understand it as order, coming from Greek, and the space which unites us. And why meaning the space where we interact. And why is this important is that our office, this is us, and one more partner is still in process of being drawn as a portrait, but we are four, and we collaborate virtually, so we have a decentralized office, and we don't, although we all know each other from school, we all collaborate, and we live in Moscow, Switzerland, and New York, and we collaborate virtually on our projects. And basically our office more or less looks like that. We are all constantly communicating via Skype, via messengers, and we'll get back to this point. But this is just the introduction of how we work, so we are not having a physical space where we all sit and we just brainstorm like that. And coming back to the concept of reuse, we wanted to introduce one topic which interests us. We call it chaos, but basically, if in this picture of Piero della Francesca, the ideal city, you can see that this is the kind of the general image of how architecture should look like, perfectly proportionate houses, clean streets, and is occupied with infrastructure, with security fences, with billboards, with advertisement, road markings. And speaking about reuse, we think that all these objects which surround us and they remain mute in the city, like such as highways or the suspended infrastructure of the city, or the billboards, or even the road markings, they mean a lot, and we can reuse them aesthetically or conceptually. And also that such things as MEP, if like the practicing architects probably who are here know that it consists, the architecture like consists 70% of this, and then we are just adding a little layer around it. And basically all these things, they give us an inspiration, and we see that they have a potential to be reused in our projects. And in our recent exhibition in Moscow Architectural Biennale, we exhibited our projects with the objects which were linked to them, this infrastructural, different materials or objects, and we will try to explain this in some of our projects.
Probably the first project I want to speak about, it is Garage. Some of you probably know it's one of the most famous contemporary art institutions in Moscow, in Russia. I don't know
what to do.
All right. So it's located in Gorky Park. Gorky Park, despite of very central location, around 7 years ago looks more or less like that. Populate with scaffolding and weird attractions. And certain moment the client decided to reuse the space and actually instead of this type of attractions place cultural attractions. So here on the photo you can see on the right it's a current building of Garage designed by OMA, and before that there was building temporary building by Shigeru designed about 5 years ago. But even before that, because of construction problems of the first pavilion, we will commissioned, actually it was an open call competition, and we won it, and finally we got a commission to build the very first pavilion of Garage. Here on the photo you can see building this pavilion which is called Hexagon. It was designed in 1923 by Zheltovsky. It's a famous classical architect from Soviet time. It's located directly to the side, next to the site, and in our case it was interesting to reuse the shape, to reuse the approach to the site. So being inspired by the shape of the pavilion, we come up with the idea of 6 boxes. We divide the exhibition program in 6 boxes and connect them with 3 courtyards 3 triangular and 1 not triangular. Because actually we had two very important restrictions on the project. One was time. We had only 5 weeks from the beginning of the project till the finish of construction. And the other one was actually budget. It was very low budget. So we come up with a material, with a temporary material, the facade construction net, which usually you can see on the construction scaffolding, and decided to use as one of the material which could reflect temporariness of the structure and at the same time could provide new interesting geometry. Sorry, something doesn't work. Oh, sorry. So here you can see we divide the project in two parts, the hardware and the software. So the hardware defined by 6 exhibition boxes with a rigid geometry, and the software, it's actually this temporary material which will wrap the structure and also allow us to combine two geometries, very rigid box geometry with a soft curved geometry of construction net. That's the way the pavilion looks from the outside. The important thing was the trees, existing trees on the site, so partially the shape also was designed by the location of the trees which we want to preserve. Interesting that this location also allowed us to form new spaces, was little squares or little gardens. Speaking about courtyards, that's the way how it looks from inside. So the gravel is semi-open in a courtyard, and the timber floor, it's actually exhibition space. And that's the way how interior looks like. So above the white box exhibition, you can see in the skylight a bit of this transparent construction net, which diffuse the light, which provide kind of ideal light for the exhibition space. This is another box. So what happens after architects actually live in the space? It's still our pavilion. It was right after the first exhibition, there was next exhibition, which was called Factory of the Music, made by Michel Gondry, pretty famous movie and video director. So inside our pavilion, he built decoration to shoot some of the scenes of the movie, and it was part of the exhibition process. So disregarding all the structure, he just placed decoration for the movies. And here you can see pretty interesting overlay of decoration. And then on the top, for example, you can see still part of our ceiling. Interesting, when we visited first time, we got completely lost in the labyrinth of our own building, and we wasn't able to recognize it. But that's new life actually provide new quality for the building. At the same time, from the outside, it kind of preserve the initial appearance. And again, coming back to the material, been really interesting effect which this construction net allowed to do us and make it looks really different. The next competition we would like to speak now, it was Tower in a Labyrinth. The new museum of, probably some of you know, city of Odense, it's in Denmark. Even though it's the 3rd biggest city in Denmark, mainly it's famous because of Hans Christian Andersen. That's the place where he was born. And a couple of years ago, they made an open call competition for the new museum, which we actually won. The background of the city, it consists of 2 important elements of the background of the site. It's actually existing buildings, including Hans Christian building, which you see right in front, in perspective of the street, and a park behind this house, which is also a very important green element. As I told you, a museum is one of actually the most important attractions of the city. But at the same time, nowadays, it's not, it has no any building, any actually mark in the city. So the program consists of 3 elements. It's existing building, it's a new museum, and it's a new cultural center. So in order to preserve the green, we put all the museum program underneath, underground, and we put one landmark to mark museum in the city. The tower. This is the connection of the existing building on the right, the new museum, and the tower on the left. Speaking again about reuse, we've been really inspired by foundations of the existing structure, and we decided to to reuse instead of store things there and put some technical rooms. It becomes a part of the exhibition space, which we continue to the left, connecting with the tower on the left bottom corner. That's how the model of the underground space looks like. And this conceptual sketch of the interior of the museum. It was a chain of the experiences. Actually, each room was dedicated to a certain scene of one of the fairy tales. In our work, it's every time important to work with non-architects, like artists, philosophers. And here on the photo, you can see Kitaev. It's actually my brother. He's an artist. And he was helping us out with the visual part of the competition. That's what happens when you visit the site with an artist. Speaking about the architecture of the tower, to us was really interesting to combine the existing background of the city, of the historical part of the city, with the contemporaneous. So Firework House is very popular in that area, and we decided to develop a tower which could combine these elements of the city. You see the historical house in the foreground and the tower. Also, it started an interesting dialogue with the landmark bell towers of the city. And that's how the tower looks like from the fairy tale garden.
Next project we would like to present is another competition in New York, which we got the second prize, and it has directly to do with the reuse concept. It's located in a much less spectacular area than the cute city of Odense. It's the outskirts of New York, Queens, and in this place, as well as in the downtown Manhattan, they have elevated abandoned railway, and they launched a competition of making basically, I would say, an analog of a famous High Line, but in Queens. So that means lower budget, lower exposure, and also different community which will react to this new infrastructure. It will not be tourists from all over the world, but probably a local community. And for us, from the beginning, it was important not to repeat already, like this is how the object looks, and this, as Milos was saying, the romanticized ruin. And for us, it was important not to repeat the same concept as Dealer's Cofidio of this beautiful green romanticized ruin, but we decided, because of the lower budget, we decided to kind of acupuncturally concentrate our architectural efforts on the intersections between avenues and streets in these places, and to put certain structures there, and to leave the rest of the ruin as it was. And basically, one of the things which we noticed in Queens is that maybe one of the most important monuments there are the billboards, because of the very generic and low-rise development. So we used it as a culture of reference for our project, and we wanted to make a billboards which, instead of advertising some commercial companies, it will basically be advertising the people who would be using it, and to make a socially usable billboard. And basically one of our first sketches looks like this, but basically the concept was to try to locate the interventions only on the intersections of, as I said, the streets and avenues, and we came up with a series of billboards, very generic and cheap and easy to construct structures, which will be filled with people, and in different way. And as a concept of habitation of these billboards, we used this Neufert. We often try to refer to Neufert. This Neufert kind of generic diagram, which just gives you an idea of ramps, stairs, and ladders, and arrange the necessary functions accordingly. So on the basically, you will see that on the lower incline, we have placed an urban garden. On the normal staircase, we placed a street art museum, and there was one billboard which was completely accessible only vertically, and that was like a social gym in this area.
The next project, which called Sky, is located in Moscow. It's Myasnitskaya Square. It's a very important empty place in Moscow, which is located at the intersection of two main streets, Sadovaya Ring and Tverskaya Street. Even though it's really important, empty space nowadays is not functioning properly. It has here combined several different processes, like for example during at 9 a.m. Just people crossing by diagonal to the big office district from the metro station, we can see on the right. During lunch break, they come in and sitting around the monument on the benches and having their lunch. Sometimes there's some concerts and shows, but everything is, as you can see, not very well facilitated. Something missing? All right, nothing missing. So to preserve this emptiness, because the new program of the square is supposed to accommodate different processes, but for us it was really important to preserve this empty space. We start to think, is it possible actually to organize several different processes on one square without any physical elements? So we come up with probably being inspired again by this cabling of trolleys, we decided to come up with the idea of the suspended infrastructure. So we preserve the whole empty area, the whole empty space of the square and put all the different infrastructure on top. Here you see one of the conceptual sketches where you see like the empty space and it's kind of new net, new ceiling for the space. Spatially also for us it was important to make it more cozy and more comfortable, and this suspended ceiling kind of create like atmosphere of the room. Here you can see the most important elements. On the right corner it's a suspended garden, and a bit on the right side, on the left corner, sorry, it's a garden, on the right side it's a square. When we've been thinking actually about current world, we realized that nowadays it's not necessary really to build the walls to offer people different ways of acting. Like for example, location of Wi-Fi point will actually attract more people than any partition. Music or lights will also create different atmosphere. So here you can see it's a bit, it's populated with, we call it MEP devices like sprinklers, loudspeakers, Wi-Fi points, lights, which works differently. And for example, here by night, you can see on the right you have some spots for the children. On the left there is a spot for dancing, and just behind the monument, the garden is lighting. Yeah, here's one of the images of the garden. And that's how cafe could looks like.
Another project which goes back to the topic of reuse is TOFA. And it is located in Bashkiria. I don't know if many of you know this place. It's located several thousand kilometers away from Russia. It's a very far province on the border of Mongolia and Kazakhstan, and it's a very beautiful and serene place. And the outskirts of the city, which we were commissioned to design a new project, looks like this. And the client has just built this brand new shopping mall. And basically here we come back to the concept of reusage and the ruin. And basically this is the building which even before being finished or it has just opened, it already became basically misfunctioning. And now they sell their bathroom tiles, toilets, carpets. It's basically like a provincial huge IKEA. And the client decided to renovate it and to make like an analog of Tate Modern there in this provincial city, and commissioned us to think of a concept for this. And basically, it's just a huge shopping mall, supermarket, and yeah, you can see everything on the picture. I think it speaks for itself. And the interior of, let's say, the first project looks like this. And for us, it was important not to immediately critique such a space, but to think what we can get from it, and also to meet the tight budget regulations. So on the first floor, we decided to we were inspired by, for example, this is Andreas Gursky beautiful supermarket picture, by this kind of empty space, again, without real partitions, but where only objects separate the space. So we decided for the first floor to completely divide it from the second and to use this concept. And basically, again, speaking back to Neufert, took some kind of typical space organization techniques and decided to organize the first floor as a pattern of just accurately located partitions and objects of art, and basically to create like a mall of art on the first floor. And going further, the second floor looks like that, and we decided to create which almost looks like the same, the first floor, but we decided to purposefully completely divide all spaces which we create. They should be all continuous and spatially consistent, but they're all different from each other. On the second floor, we created, according to the program, an art museum, which was referring back to the typical traditional Bashkirian wooden architecture. You also saw it in one of the first slides. And we created meandering labyrinth of wooden boxes where people can navigate and feel completely differently than on a completely open first floor. So it's much more closed and little spaces where you can really enjoy. And we think that it really fits the provincial quality, provincial not in a bad way, but more in a, I don't know, less globalized quality of local art, which would be exhibited there. So this is how the space looks like. And another, like you can see the bottom floor, this was another place where they wanted to put the museum of the city. And we also decided to make it a completely different spatial experience. And we placed there a museum of bashkiria, local yurts, agora, and a model of the city. And we want to create a kind of a cave-like dark experience when you only see the objects, and also to make it distinguished from other spaces, but also by not using too much extra like interior design features, but only by placing these objects. And this is how the original object looked like. And for the client, it was very important, of course, the facade, because he, at some point, although he has just built this building, but he realizes that maybe this is not the most beautiful facade. And he was kind of disturbed by it, but to tell you the truth, we actually liked it, this weird collage, and we decided, you know, like as if you buy a very expensive Comme des Garçons new jacket, but it actually doesn't cover anything. We decided to use the same concept for our building, and basically making this ruin wrapped in completely transparent new skin, which gives it a new quality, but at the same time doesn't try to fake or hide anything, and doesn't try to make a new cool building, but shows you that here's the new layer and here's the old layer. And this is how this, the conceptual image, how this building wrapped in this transparent skin looks from the square.
The next project, the 3, it actually was complete just 2 days ago, the day before yesterday. It was a students' workshop where we were supposed to work on wooden construction, and actually Leonid was touched with this project much more than me in very direct meaning. So the little white thing on his head is from this workshop, and I think he deserves to speak about it now.
Yes, it's a completely different scale, completely different. Basically, we came yesterday from Hungary after leading this workshop in wooden construction, where we, basically it's a workshop for students from all over the world, where like 10 workshop leaders lead in a little group and teach students how to build from wood. And
not so little, it was 12 students.
What? Ah, sorry, okay. And basically our initial concept was to create, basically there is a village of these people who make the wooden construction, and we wanted to mark the coming there by a wall, which brings people together. Basically, that nowadays the wall usually divides people and separates them, but we wanted to create kind of an infrastructural wall which doesn't divide people but brings them together. But according to the limitation of the workshop, we were given 3 cubic meters of wood, so we kind of brought down our ambitions to build the wall all over Hungary, and decided just to focus on a part of it.
The mock-up of the wall.
The mock-up of the wall. Yes, and that was kind of our simple diagrams to explain our concept to students, that today walls separate people, we will bring them together, we will all build this wall and we will all occupy it. And yeah, the traditional wall, how it's seen in media now. And we found this romantic image of like kids sitting on a fence and basically doing nothing but populating it, and that was our inspiration. And hopefully in the end you will see that actually it worked exactly like that. That was some conceptual images of the project, how we designed with the students what infill would be inside this wall. We sketched with them different drawings, how can it be, different objects, different roofs. So basically it was a participative workshop, so we tried to also give freedom to the students, but also to lead it. And that was kind of the final sketch which we came up with. We built a model with them. We tried different, basically the wood section goes up smaller, therefore it's like structurally stable. We learned lots of different things, and then we started building it, and that's like the first layer is exactly where I wounded myself, but luckily we were able to continue the building. We learned lots of interesting things. This is quite a cheesy picture from the sunflower seeds, but which we still like. And this is how, like on the last day when everyone could go up the wall. And yeah, and another topic which we wanted to address in this thing is that we kind of created this grid in a week with students, this kind of pure geometry, but we wanted also to leave this, coming back to the concept of reuse, to leave it for a future reuse. So we gave a possibility of students to design this, basically like how the migrants come and use this kind of temporary aesthetics of their houses. We create a grid for let's say, theoretical. Yes, for infill. And basically here you can see that we use these trash bags in order to create like this temporary infill. On the top there's a golden refugee blanket covering the space. There is a drop-down screen, so there's a straw bed, which is hardly seen, but Artem can show you. Yeah, and basically
this drop-down screen.
Basically, we can imagine that next year all these temporary elements can be ripped off and the wall can be reused or used for teaching students some other techniques, but still built, still using this rigid structure.
Yeah, for us it was really important to try to experiment with aesthetics, because usually when we're speaking about house, we every time imagine like very well, not very well designed house, but in fact, as we've seen in some images before, it could be really self-made out of cheapest materials, and this is the house, and that's actually a designed house. So to us it was interesting to understand where's the limits of this aesthetics and how we can actually proceed with that. The next project we're going to speak about, yeah, and the last, it's important to know, it's Emma. That's actually, the project was mentioned in the introduction. It is a space in Moscow, even though it's again located pretty centrally. Now it's, before we came, it was very abandoned space, consists of several buildings. And to us was, again, important to make it as fast as possible and as cheap as possible. So speaking about reuse, we understand that it doesn't make so much sense to tear the whole thing down, but we try to preserve as much as possible and keep all the elements, existing elements, and reuse them as much as possible. Like, for example, this big window. This was kind of conceptual sketch of our first image of the space, which consists of different areas with different atmospheres and some glossy, fancy new skin. Speaking about skin and industrial materials, as what we've been speaking about house before, we've been interested in not foil.
Yeah, basically we were asked by the
installation, full installation, I would say. And usually you can see it in all the ductworks, exposed ductworks and air ducts.
Yep. We were asked by the client also to insulate the building, besides creating an art cluster and a place of where people can go for movies, for concerts, for lectures, but also to insulate the facade, but again, the limited budget, the limited time frame. So that's why we refer to this traditionally hidden insulation material.
Yeah. So here you can see the first image of the space. So we preserve as much as possible existing buildings and wrap it with this cheap material. But at the same time, the other problem we faced, because this actually, it's not enclosed space. It was kind of a little badly defined street, open very much to ugly buildings behind. So we had to introduce new spatial element, this disk, which you can see right in the middle of the image. That's how the foil looks during the day. And this is actually the disk, the important element which somehow hide in the background and drag all the attention to the disk. And
without creating a physical wall.
The whole space consists of several courtyards, to which of them we dedicate different atmosphere. The upper courtyard on top was more informal. This was the entrance hall, and this was the actually the main courtyard with a net on top of it. Yeah, to this courtyard, it we call like public room or open room. We want to create a bit more cozy atmosphere, so we again use this suspended net with the lights and reflectors. And speaking about the idea of the project, from the very beginning, it was media project. So to us, it was important to design not only a physical part of the project, but also the media story and the performance of the building in future. So immediately, this moon with the stars become very popular shot on Instagram and Facebook. And on the opening, we've been serving this refugee blankets, which was part of the performance. So everyone was kind of also covered with this foil. And it was pretty successful, so you can see these screenshots from Instagram, where hashtag full of foil and Emma actually was very popular. And for us, the most important performance happened to be it was marriage of one of our partners, Artem, the one who's in Moscow. And here you can see him happy with his beautiful wife with a background of foil.
Right before the building finally disappeared.
Coming back to our office, yeah, okay.
Sorry. No, just...
Yeah, I can speak endless. He has to really interrupt me pretty often. Continue, please.
Yeah, coming back to the way how we communicate, and while designing this last project, which Yuri told you about, and Artem now showed the images, we were all based in different cities, and we decided just to document the way how we designed it, but because we were all in different places, we just had like a common chat, which we decided to, without any editing, to publish for ourselves and to make this book, which says it's documentation of Bureau Kosmos, how we did this project, and it's basically just text with dates.
It's pure design process, actually how it's shown in time in every second.
Yes, it has almost no edition, and only we marked up some kind of things which were not, maybe we wouldn't like that someone knows about them. So some personal things, some things about the clients, some curses which we send to each other. Yes, and yeah, and we self-published it, and it just basically because the building has been has disappeared and it was a temporary art cluster. But this is the way how we remember this project, and each one
was
has
again media continuation of our project.
That's how it stayed alive. And thank you very much. And that's an image from Emma project. Again, their usage of a classic traditional Soviet logo, which was designed for this factory, which was demolished, and we reinstalled it on the building while it was functioning. Thank you.